Welcome to Why America. I'm Leeja Miller. I just got back from 2 weeks abroad. Highly recommend if you can get away. Thanks to your support of this channel here on YouTube or over on Substack, I was able to get one measly week without reading the fucking news. So thank you so much for that. On Monday afternoon, resident White House goon Stephen Miller went on CNN to discuss Trump's decision to deploy National Guard troops to U.S. cities. And after claiming erroneously that Trump has plenary authority to do whatever he wants, something he clearly didn't mean to say and didn't know how to walk back, Stephen Miller had what can only be described as a full-on mental glitch on live TV. And like when I read the headlines about it, I was like, sure, whatever. They're always saying he's having a meltdown on news. Like, this is just another clickbait headline. But no, I need you to watch the full thing because it's actually batshit cuckoo bananas.
Well, the administration filed an appeal this morning with the Ninth Circuit. I would note the administration won an identical case in the Ninth Circuit just a few months ago with respect to the federalizing of the California National Guard. Under Title 10 of the U.S. Code, the president has plenary authority.
Stephen? Stephen? Hey, Stephen, can you hear me? It seemed, Stephen, I apologize. It seems like we're having a technical issue. We'll try to fix that and get back to you after a quick break. Stay with CNN.
The version now on CNN's YouTube channel has just completely removed that segment, making it look like it never happened. But thanks to the internet, it does live on. They claimed it was a technical difficulty, but that's not how a human from planet Earth reacts to a technical difficulty live on air. You say oh, I can't hear you. What was that? Did you say something? I think you're breaking up. Anything at all to indicate that something's malfunctioning. Instead, he starts to try to walk it back, thinks better of it, and then just fully and completely freezes, does a full-on Mitch McConnell. It's such bizarre behavior that even though it happened in the middle of the day on a random CNN show amid a busy news cycle with constant coverage, it went viral and got a lot of people speculating about what the fuck is going on. Again, because that is not how a human person reacts to technical difficulties, so it does indicate that something else was afoot there. Here's my take. Stephen Miller was discussing, quote, Title 10 of the U.S. Code in support of Trump's authority to unilaterally send in the troops against the will of state governors. Title 10 of the U.S. Code is titled Armed Forces and has a number of subsections. Up until now, Trump has been citing to his authority under 10 U.S.C. 𝗪𝗧𝗪𝗧 to call in the National Guard in L.A. and elsewhere. And I think it's important to know what the law says, because I think these laws are the crux of how the Trump regime plans to push forward with attacking the enemy from within in the coming months and years. Title 10, Section 12406 says in full, quote, whenever, 1, the United States or any of the commonwealths or possessions is invaded or is in danger of invasion by a foreign nation, 2, there is a rebellion or danger of a rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States, or 3, the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States, the president may call into federal service members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress the rebellion, or execute those laws. Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, or in the case of the District of Columbia, through the commanding general of the National Guard of the District of Columbia. The lawsuits against his federalization of the National Guard have revolved around the fact that this authority that he's citing to requires that the orders are issued through the governors of the states, meaning with the approval of governors. Other lawsuits also point out that there is no actual legal basis for Trump to send in the troops. None of those 3 scenarios listed in the law has been met. There is no rebellion or invasion or inability to enforce the laws. Basically, it's all based on lies and zero evidence. And that's why the federalization of National Guard troops in Oregon was stopped for now by a Trump-appointed judge, I'll note, though Trump has tried to circumvent that ruling by sending in the National Guard from other states instead. A hearing is scheduled for tomorrow before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals as the Trump administration tries to get around that ruling. In Chicago, a judge declined to block the deployment of the troops for now. The judge didn't rule it was lawful, they just declined to make a ruling at all, pending further information from both sides. And the real underlying problem here with Trump's legal arguments, which are poor arguments that I'm sure are going to work anyway once they reach the Supreme Court, is that the regime is claiming they need to do this in order to execute U.S. laws regarding immigration enforcement. They're being blocked blocked from executing these laws written by Congress, so it's in the benefit of the people of the United States that they should be able to go in and enforce it. But what happens when the federal government is coming in and breaking the law and claiming it's part of immigration enforcement? He doesn't need to send in the troops to enforce the law as written. He needs them to enforce his illegal overreach, his arrests of U.S. citizens, his Gestapo's excessive use of force. This is not an enforcement of the law. It is breaking the law and then claiming they're enforcing some law that doesn't exist that says they can come in and use excessive force to arrest people who are here legally and then deny them due process and send them to a gulag. This is important context because up until now, those cases have revolved around, like I said, Section 12406. But Title 10 also includes another law, commonly referred to as the Insurrection Act, which is, in relevant parts, 10 U.S.C. Section 252 and 253. Section 252 says, quote, "Whenever the president considers that unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages, or rebellion against the authority of the United States make it impracticable to enforce the laws of the United States in any state by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, he may call into federal service such of the militia of any state and use such of the armed forces as he considers necessary to enforce those laws or to suppress the rebellion." Section 253 goes on to say, quote, "The president, by using the militia or the armed forces, or both, or by any other means, shall take such measures as he considers necessary to suppress in a state any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy, if it, 1, so hinders the execution of the laws of that state and of the United States within the state that any part or class of its people is deprived of a right, privilege, immunity, or protection named in the Constitution and secured by law, and the constituted authorities of that state are unable, fail, or refuse to protect that right, privilege, or immunity, or to give that protection, or 2, opposes or obstructs the execution of the laws of the United States, or impedes the course of justice under those laws. In any situation covered by Clause 1, the state shall be considered to have denied the equal protection of the laws secured by the Constitution." That is the Insurrection Act that Trump has continually threatened to invoke, especially in recent days, as a means to get around the courts that try to block him from sending in troops to Democrat-led cities. That's why the members of the regime repeatedly use words like invasion and insurrection to describe Democrats, to describe leftists, to describe immigrants, and so on, because that is the playbook of an autocratic regime. You turn dissent into terrorism, and anyone who doesn't agree with you into a terrorist, an insurrectionist, a criminal, a dangerous element that must be stamped out, and claim that the government is therefore legitimately using its power to stamp it out. And so when Stephen Miller talks about Title 10, what he's really talking about is the Insurrection Act. But when he glitched on CNN, that's because he made the claim that Trump has plenary authority under Title 10. The problem is that Trump does not have plenary authority. Period. Under any section of any law in the United States. Plenary power means complete and unchecked power. It means he can do whatever he wants without having to answer to Congress or to the judiciary. That is literally the antithesis of how our government is set up. There are 3 branches. There are checks and balances. However, Stephen Miller also couldn't walk it back. He couldn't say, sorry, I didn't mean plenary authority. Here's what I actually meant, and move on. Because the reality is that he is trying to push an incorrect and unfounded interpretation of the law that Trump does have plenary power. He thinks Trump should have plenary authority no matter what the law says, and so he can't say no he doesn't, because that undermines his ultimate goal. He said the quiet part out loud, and then completely glitched out on live TV. Please make no mistake when you see something and think surely they won't go there. They will. They've been teeing up the Insurrection Act since before the election, and they are just waiting for the right moment and for us to be broken down enough that they can move forward with it as swiftly and easily as possible. Trump will attempt to use the Insurrection Act. It is not a matter of if, it is a matter of when, period, full stop. And Stephen Miller will be at the forefront of that crusade. Turning to another Trump goon, Attorney General Pam Bondi testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday, during which she spent a solid 4.5 hours fully glitching out. Often, the way news outlets report on a story differs depending on the bias of the publication, and it's hard to know how your own interpretation of bias influences your interpretation of the news. This headline from NBC News caught my eye. Schiff recaps questions Bondi refused to answer during oversight hearing. Using the Ground News browser extension, I can see that in the US, NBC News is considered left-leaning. To get a fuller picture of the story on all sides of the political spectrum, I can click on full coverage, which will show me coverage of the same story from publications across the political spectrum. My partner on today's video, Ground News, uses 3 independent monitoring monitoring organizations to assess the bias rating for each publication. Each news monitoring organization has their own methodology, including editorial reviews, blind bias surveys, independent reviews, and third-party research. These are legitimately independent organizations, but they are limited by the data available to them. Their analysis is done in the context of the US political system. Our Overton window has shifted so far right that NBC News is considered left-leaning, and that tells you a lot about the context within which the media you're consuming operates. And thanks to Ground News, I get even more context, including how factual each publication is and who owns it, giving me a well-rounded idea of the motivations, biases, and accuracy of the news I'm consuming. Wouldn't it be great if everyone in America had that much information about the news they consume? Because depending on where you or your family members get the news, you're going to get very different takes on the same story. This is where Ground News comes in and why I've been using them for over a year. Today's partner, Ground News, is an app and website that offers tools to help you critically analyze the news you read, providing context to understand the full picture. I feel better equipped to make sense of what's happening in the world without being influenced by just one perspective. And listen, I'm not the only one who loves Ground News. The Nobel Peace Center even called it an excellent way to stay informed, avoid echo chambers, and expand your worldview. I'm always really impressed with Ground News and genuinely think they're a great resource. If you want to stay informed on US politics and more, subscribe through this QR code or our link below at ground.news/Leeja for 40% off this unlimited access Vantage plan. It comes out to $5 a month for unlimited access to all the features I've mentioned. Thanks, Ground News. Yesterday's hearing with Pam Bondi was a kind of hearing that happens frequently. It's meant to conduct oversight into the functioning of the Department of Justice. And this one was especially necessary given the numerous ways the Justice Department has been weaponized and acted as the personal law firm of Donald Trump over the last 8 months. But at the same time, this hearing was largely meant to bring Pam Bondi out like a show pony and give Democrats some sound bites that they can point to later to say that they're really pushing back. It won't actually amount to anything because Democrats don't have enough power to do anything with the information they unearthed yesterday. But it's an opportunity to make the administration look bad and point out what a bad job they're doing to the public at large. And so I think it's important to take a look at the topics that were discussed, not because this hearing will amount to anything, but because it is meant to give us, the American people, more insight into the inner workings of our Justice Department. Because remember, democracy is based on the consent of the governed, and transparency is key to the proper functioning of democracy, meaning that being as opaque and secretive as possible and refusing to share information with us is the exact goal of this anti-democratic regime. And with that in mind, it's particularly stark the way that Pam Bondi showed up to this hearing, not as a humble public servant fulfilling her duty to the American people to serve as an example of great legal thinking combined with strong moral character, as someone who understands the weight and importance of her job and wishes to uphold the legitimacy of her department before the American people. That is not what we saw yesterday. Instead, we saw a person bedazzled with a cross and truly one of the more hideous American flag trinket necklaces I've ever seen, who is using the guise of Christianity and patriotism as a very thin veil to hide her true loyalties, which are completely and solely to Donald Trump, for whom she served as a personal attorney, and for Project 2025, which she championed while working for Trump and Project 2025 aligned American First Policy Institute. She showed up ready to fight, having clearly memorized canned attack responses against certain Democratic senators. Anyone who's taken 5 seconds to study logical fallacies, which should be anyone like Pam Bondi who went to law school, would know that an ad hominem attack, that is a personal attack against someone, is not a valid way to argue against a point. In fact, her entire testimony would be a great way to test students on their knowledge of logical fallacies, because she gave us an example of just about every one in the book. For an example of an ad hominem attack, look no further than the exchange with Hawaii Senator Mazie Hirono, who asked Bondi about the investigation that was closed into border czar Tom Homan, who happily accepted a $50,000 bribe from undercover FBI agents, and then she just closed the investigation, to which Pam Bondi responded,
"You were also on video outside the White House protesting with a group called CASA where Antifa members were. Does that mean you're a member of Antifa?"
Or there was the exchange with Senator Blumenthal, who asked her about her past work in a law firm, to which she responded,
"Senator Blumenthal, I cannot believe that you would accuse me of impropriety when you lied about your military service.
I am
you
not
lied.
asking
You
you.
admitted you
I am
lied
not
to be
accusing you
elected
of
a U.S. senator.
impropriety.
You
I'm asking
lied.
you
How
about
dare you? I'm a
conversations
career prosecutor.
with Mr.
Don't you
Ballard.
ever challenge my integrity.
That's actually a twofer there, because you also get the appeal to authority fallacy, which is when someone tries to argue that a person must be right because of their position of authority or fame. I'm a career prosecutor, therefore I should never be challenged. Or there's the red herring fallacy, a favorite of the Trump administration, in which you try to distract your audience by introducing something completely irrelevant to the discussion. Like when Dick Durbin asked Bondi about the legal rationale for sending troops to Illinois, and she responded with,
I wish you loved Chicago as much as you hate President Trump.
As though Durbin's love for Chicago or hate for Trump has anything to do with her legal rationale for the decision to send troops to Illinois. And on and on. And while it is a fun exercise in logical reasoning to try to spot the fallacies, the problem is, of course, as always, we're dealing with people for whom logic doesn't matter. They are perfectly comfortable with the cognitive dissonance, with arguments that are so easy to poke holes in, it's hard to even know where to begin. If you were writing a villain into a government role for a TV show, you wouldn't even write Pam Bondi because it's so on the nose and obvious as to verge on uninspired. Every time you think, surely they won't say that, surely they won't take that next worst step or say the next worst thing possible, they always do. It's actually starting to become predictable for all the chaos and overwhelm that their actions cause. Just consider what the worst thing they could do is and assume that they will do it, and you will be right most of the time. Even if they haven't done it yet, assume they will, and people on TikTok will start calling you a fortune teller. Which is why, as annoying as it is to have to keep watching as America crumbles, it is important to keep an eye on what the DOJ is doing so as to better predict what's to come. And yesterday's hearing helped to lay out the more appalling abuses of authority by the DOJ since Trump took office, just so that we can get a running list among the chaos and the noise. Those are as follows in no particular order: the indictment of James Comey. Comey was the FBI director first under Obama starting in 2013, and then under Trump, though he was quickly fired a few months into Trump's first term. Comey made an enemy of Trump when he wasn't sufficiently loyal to him, and because he pursued an investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 election. We all know Trump is obsessed with that Russia investigation and mentions it regularly, despite the fact that it happened a decade ago, probably because he has dementia, allegedly, and so Comey became his prime enemy related to that probe. Trump has repeatedly told Bondi to go after Comey in retaliation for his actions, and in fact, after U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, 𝗪𝗓𝗡𝗏, reportedly refused to indict Comey, he was fired, or he quit, depending on who you ask, and replaced with Trump's personal attorney, Lindsay Halligan, an insurance lawyer with zero prosecution experience, who then, days after she was appointed and right before the statute of limitations was set to expire, moved forward with the indictment and is the sole signature on Comey's indictment documents. The indictment accuses Comey of making false statements to Congress regarding leaks to the press about the Russia probe, an accusation Comey pleaded not guilty to today in his arraignment in the Eastern District of Virginia. When asked about why this entire scenario is so fucking dodgy, Pam Bondi insisted that she would not speak about the indictment and refused to provide us with any transparency or even attempt to make an excuse for what the fuck is going on there. Then there is the firing of career prosecutors, apparently in retaliation for their work on investigating January 6th rioters, or refusing to investigate Trump's named enemies. She refused to comment on her actions there, acting as though it's her right as our employee to deny us that information. Interesting. She also refused to comment on military strikes on Venezuelan boats in the Caribbean, strikes that every legal expert with any integrity left has said easily breaks numerous federal and international laws. The president can't just bomb civilians, and yet here we are and no one is doing anything about it, and Pam Bondi, our employee whose salary we pay, refused to elucidate us on what the fuck they're doing and how they think they can justify that. And then, of course, there was the Epstein files. Watching the administration and Congress debate each other about the Epstein files is like looking at that meme where there are three Spider-Mans all pointing at each other. Like, yes, we all know that you are all horrible people who associate with horrible people so long as they will line your pockets. So when asked about Trump being flagged in the FBI's review of the Epstein files, or why the Epstein files haven't been released even though Pam herself said she had the files sitting on her desk, Pam Bondi acted as though it was deeply insulting and preposterous to insinuate that Donald Trump would be included in a massive trove of documents about a person who was his close, if not closest, personal friend.
So who gave the order to flag records related to President Trump?
To flag records for President Trump?
To flag any records which included his name.
I'm not going to discuss anything about that with you, Senator.
Eventually, you're going to have to answer for your conduct in this. You won't do it today, but eventually you will.
And instead, she tried to turn it on the Democratic senators, asking them what they're trying to hide and why they didn't ask any of this of Merrick Garland in the last 4 years while he was Attorney General. Which, like, fair question to ask, but also you literally are sitting in his position now and can release the documents now. So, like, if you care so much, why don't you just do it? It is not a valid argument to say, well, Democrats did bad things too. Oh yeah? Prove it. Let's see the files. And speaking of Trump goons short-circuiting over the Epstein files, Mike Johnson is now reportedly holding up the confirmation of Democratic Arizona Representative 𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓, who won a special election 2 weeks ago, and Johnson has refused to allow her to begin her work, leaving her constituents without representation in the House. This is reportedly due to the fact that she would be the decisive vote necessary to force Johnson's hand and release the Epstein documents. Johnson has, of course, denied that and then changed the subject. Cruelty is truly the name of the game with Mike Johnson, who is using this government shutdown as a means of taking revenge on Democrats and federal workers to try to force Democrats into agreeing to Republican demands on the budget. Basically, he's being as mean as possible and then blaming it on the Democrats for not folding to his demands. And the only people who lose are the American people, the ones who are without a representative in the House, or who are one of the 750,000 federal workers he said may or may not get any back pay at all after this shutdown, despite what the law says, claiming it's just Democrats who are at fault for shutting down the government. Again, there is a federal law passed during Trump's first term, no less, that says they are due back pay. Now, those 750,000 federal workers are unsure when or whether they will receive their next paycheck. What a way to repay people who wake up every morning and give their lives and livelihoods to this government. It's despicable. And while the cruelty and the obfuscation and the frankly just shitty execution of their jobs as our government employees has become commonplace, it's important, as I do every week, to stop and say, hey, this is not normal. At most other times in our history, a single bullet point from this video would have dominated headlines for weeks. And it's only through their determination to move as quickly as possible to break as many norms and laws as possible, so we're distracted and constantly on the back foot. It's only because of that that the headlines are moving on so fast. So Pam Bondi's hearing and Mike Johnson's cruelty and Stephen Miller's fake glitch are all opportunities for us to pause and take a second and actually look square on in the face at the people who are working every day tirelessly to undermine our democracy and the functioning of this country. Because Trump is their mouthpiece and their puppet, but they are the ones with the soullessness to understand how this all works and use it to twist society to give themselves as much power as possible while hurting the vast majority of us in the process. Trump will go down in history as the Hitler of our time, but Stephen Miller and Pam Bondi and Mike Johnson and others are the ones who will stand trial at Nuremberg if we ever get out of this. If you want the joy of supporting independent media, consider clicking the big join button here on YouTube or joining my Patreon community at patreon.com/Leeja Miller, where you'll find all of these episodes completely ad-free. Thank you to my multi-platinum patrons Mark, Sarah Shelby, Art, David, R.H., Latranger Lucas, Thomas Johnson, and Tay. Your generosity makes this channel what it is, so thank you. And if you like this episode, you'll like the one where I outline how Trump plans to use RICO to prosecute leftists. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day. Bye-bye!